Amy, we live in a world where we're constantly focused on doing more. But what I really like about you is that you're all about doing less, but being more. And I really want to highlight the being part here. So we are going to dive into all of this further. But before we do, I'd love to just learn a little bit more about you and how you have really become more.
I love that. Thank you for having me. My journey to being a business owner has been not a planned one. It wasn't what I thought I would do when I grew up, though I do find I have a lot of skills that match that title. I actually started out professionally as a high school English teacher, where I loved working with kids and really helping them turn the light bulb on to think critically, to learn how to write and to use language in responsible ways. And so I did that for a very short time. On the side, I started a very small business. I didn't know I was starting a business, but it grew to over 20 years of me becoming a leader and leading a sales force of about 1,000 people across the United States. And so I did that for 2 decades, largely women. And then just about 8 years ago, there was a very significant transition from sort of the top of one mountain, I would say, unexpectedly and without really any strategic long-term plan. Again, I started another company that I thought I would do on the side. It's called Amy Kemp Inc. And I got certified to use an assessment tool that's called the Habit Finder. It measures our subconscious habits of thinking. And I thought I would just lead a couple of groups of women through this for fun, kind of to scratch an itch that I had. It quickly grew into my full-time work. And then now 8 years later, I am running a company where I get to really work with people on how their habits of thinking are impacting their work and their relationships and their lives. So fun.
That's so much fun. And don't the best things sometimes happen by accident?
Mhm. Almost always. And not, I mean, by accident, sort of, right? But also by being open, by saying yes to the door that unexpectedly shows up in front of you without any reason. And kind of trusting your intuition, trusting your gut at those particular moments. This business in particular, this is really interesting. I was out in Salt Lake City speaking at an event, and a coach that I had worked with years prior, but had just stayed in touch with, lives out there. And so I said, I'm going to be in town. I'd love to see you and connect. And over dinner, I shared that I had been having this feeling that I was supposed to be gathering groups of women who were leading or starting businesses or doing something where they just didn't have a lot of community, but they were making a big impact. And I kept on thinking, I really need to do this. And it seemed so ridiculous given how busy our lives were, both work and at home at that time. And he said, well, we're starting certification to use the Habit Finder on Monday. So this was a Thursday. And when I say I had never considered it until that point, never. But when he said it, and maybe this is the happy accident, I just knew that I could never have orchestrated it. And yet everything about it said yes.
Well, and it's one of those things where clearly you were having these thoughts and these feelings, and then, but you had to actually articulate it out loud. And you articulated it at the right time to the right person that opened up your world to this new possibility and new potential. But you could have just let it slide. You could have just said, oh, maybe one day, that sounds interesting. But you took advantage of that opportunity and really seized the moment. And I mean, we're gonna get into it today, but so much has happened because of that decision to just move forward and really hone in on that opportunity.
Absolutely. Yes.
I do want to touch on the high school teaching days to your side business, because you said that it really wasn't planned to start the side business, but you eventually became a leader of a sales force of over 1,000 women. So
I did.
How did you go from high school teacher to leading a team of 1,000 people? Because that's a lot more than a 30-person classroom.
I know. Not overnight. It wasn't. I've never built businesses where I did quantum leaps. I am a slow, consistent, steady grower of businesses. I've always worked a lot through relationships. I don't really know how to do it any other way. other than to listen to people's stories and to step into their worlds and to learn about them. My parents both were in sales. And so I had a really healthy perspective of what sales is when it's done in a way that is mutually beneficial. And even business, I sometimes think it's a bad rap where we make it into like a someone wins and someone loses instead of a I have something you need and you have something that I need, and we exchange those things. And when we do that, we both come away with a stronger relationship and it's a win-win. And that was what was always modeled to me. So the growth of that business was very incremental over time. There were no like huge overnight leaps. I simply sold the next product to the next person, developed the next leader, took the next step, and that was right in front of me along the way, which
So
is
was
kind
this
of how this has grown as well, this new business I'm working in.
Well, relationships are everything. And
Ugh.
to your point about having a healthy mindset around sales, I too grew up with a dad that was in sales. And I actually got into the sales profession myself prior to starting this podcast and taking the leap into entrepreneurism. And I always worked in the B2B world, but I always thought of it as, I'm not in B2B, I'm in H to H. I'm in humans to helping humans. And because I think that sales is all about relationships and helping one another. And I think the sooner that you can really wrap your head around that, the easier it is to just have conversations, because that's really what it is. It's having a conversation. But I will caveat that I think there are slimy ways to sell. And some people do not do it the right way, which there's no right or wrong way. But I will say there is a wrong way, but there's no right way, I guess. But anyways, my point is that like you, I have a great mindset about selling, because it's something where if you are selling the right thing and you believe in it and you believe that you can help some, and then it can actually be a really beautiful thing at the end of the day.
I agree. Were you surprised? I was surprised to find out that people didn't like sales, or they thought sales was bad in some way at first, because the only experience I had was in our house where it wasn't weird or strange or bad. It was just like a part of living in a community where there was a lot of connections and relationships. So I just was surprised.
It was definitely surprising. I think more so hopping into the world of entrepreneurism, the negative feelings people had about it, because I've had lots of conversations with women, and that's really sometimes what holds them back from really having expansive businesses is the selling aspect. But my mom actually was from the finance world. So she was more used to like the steady paycheck and like systems and processes and things like that. So it was I had the yin and the yang in the household. So sometimes I heard about like the slimy, what do you call them, used car salesman that my mom would give as the example. But then I had my dad, the dreamer. So it was a very interesting dynamic, but it worked because it balanced me, if that makes sense. And it gave me some grounding there, because sometimes I might fly a little bit too high. So you got to reel me in a little bit here. With your sales team, were you in like a network marketing type of business?
I was, yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
I think those can be really, really beautiful businesses.
I learned a lot about the fundamentals of business, just the very simple processes, the skills that grow businesses. I'm so grateful for that experience. And also, I'm grateful because I did get to grow a team at a very grassroots, sitting in their living room, knowing their families level. And that was really instrumental in the way that I see businesses serving women in particular, and why I believe so much that women who own businesses and run them and grow them are healthier women overall in all of their roles in our world. And so it just really built this belief in me that the development of a person through that process is vital and important, and it makes a difference for generations.
Definitely, especially you're witnessing it firsthand. I mean, when you're building, especially network marketing businesses, a lot of them are potentially moms where they're juggling all of life at once. So you're able to sit down and really get to know them on a more intimate level. But I think why I bring that up, that's their moms, it's that their kids are watching. So what you're doing on a daily basis, they're just sponges and soaking it up. So you're able to witness them having these teachable moments and really impacting the rest of their life based on what potentially seems like a regular conversation to you could have really a big impact on them for future generations, like
Absolutely.
you said. Yes. I am curious. So you built this team of 1,000 people. What happened? Did you decide to let it go, or did the business disintegrate?
Yeah, no, not at all. What happened was very unexpected and probably something we don't talk about enough just in the life of a leader and the journey of a leader, which is I experienced like an internal transition where there were external things obviously leading to it, but also just inside the passion and the energy and the work that I was doing. I couldn't quite capture the same energy I once had. I felt sort of just a loss, things that I used to love to do or even just didn't mind doing, I no longer wanted to do or couldn't get myself to do. It was a very disconcerting, uncomfortable feeling because I didn't ask for it. I didn't plan for it. I probably would have even, had you asked me at the time, said, no, thank you. I would like to just continue on the path I'm on. And so it was unexpected. At the same time, I had a conversation that I write about in my book where we met with our financial advisor, and it was just kind of our annual check-in. And I had filled out all the forms with all of our information. Our kids at that time were kind of in the middle of all the activities with no one driving. Maybe one was driving, but it was, it was busy. And we sat down, and I'll never forget it. It was a life-changing moment where she sat down with all the papers in front of her and said, you're organized with your money. You're not overspending. You know where it's all going. There's just one problem if you want to achieve the goals that you've outlined here. And that is you're not making enough money.
How did that feel?
And it felt like all the air left the room. I felt this descending weight of, oh my goodness. I looked around to see if there was anyone else who could take care of that. Like, this wasn't my problem to solve. And my husband is in education, and he should be and will stay there until he retires. And so I knew he was only going to make more money by getting older. And so I felt deeply uncomfortable. One, because the perception was probably that I was doing really, really well. And maybe we had loftier goals than some people also, right? We could have cut back on some of those goals. But at that point, I knew I've got to be the one that takes this on. I knew that. I also knew I could not work any more hours because I was already working full-time hours, and I was not going to sacrifice the time I had with the kids outside of work at that time. And so I knew that it wasn't going to be an external change that led to what we needed. It was going to have to be me becoming more, me believing in more, and me making some really hard choices that not everyone would understand or validate. And so that led to just years of transition and really quiet, but also important work that I was doing on myself.
It kind of ties back into what I said at the beginning. You had to figure out a way to do less, but to be more in order to create the life for yourself and for your family that you really were striving towards. And in today's society, I imagine that at the time that was pretty difficult because we're in a society where we're very focused on the do instead of the be. So I guess when you're taking a step back, obviously time has progressed and now you're helping people with all this. But at the moment, how did you really go internally and focus on, okay, how am I going to be able to make more money, feel the passion and the fire like I once did, and also be present for my family, but not like take up my entire life and also feel fulfilled, I guess.
Yeah. I feel like on this side of it, I can tell the story and it sounds really neat and tidy, but most entrepreneurial journeys aren't. Most of them are really messy and complicated. They are winding paths that lead us in many directions. What I would say that I did during that time was I worked with several different coaches because even like my husband couldn't really hold space for it because he was really attached to outcomes and what was going on inside of me. I needed to have space where I could process what was happening, the needs, the boundaries I needed to hold up in order to stay within my integrity, but then also what was this thing that was growing and was going to come out of this transition, and how could I do it in a way that honored all of that? So again, now I look back on it and I think, okay, well, I did work with coaches. That was something I did really do well, and something that I always say to people who are going through a transition of any kind professionally, especially if you're a leader. But I also think that through that, I got really quiet in terms of who I was asking for feedback, who I was telling what I was doing. I had to really narrow the voices that I was listening to and get very quiet and in touch with my own intuition, some of which I had kind of overridden for some time. And so it took a while for me to re-access it and to kind of learn to listen to that gut feeling, like those little whispers again. But those little whispers are kind of what led to the creation of the new thing. There also was a time in there where I was just making space for something new well before I had the conversation that I was going to be certified to become a habit finder coach. And before, like, there was a lot in there where I didn't know, and it felt very uncomfortable. It felt very uncertain. And I'll describe it like I practice yoga, and sometimes if I don't know where the teacher is going and my foot is in the air and where are we going with this? Where is this going to land? Feels really uncomfortable and unsettling. So learning how to live in that discomfort a little bit and to sort of feel everything that comes up, because transitions like that have so much to teach us if we pay attention and we listen and we learn from them. So again, I can make it sound really neat and easy, very muddled, and it depended on the day how I was doing with it.
Let's be honest, like, entrepreneurship is hard. Every single day is a high or a low. And I think mindset is very important in just entrepreneurism and in general, because you need to be able to pick yourself up on those days where it feels really heavy. And I always say, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because when you're uncomfortable, that's typically when the growth happens. And that's what was happening behind the scenes for you, is that you were growing and you were evolving. And I think that's probably why you had that little itch inside of you when you were building this team, that it was no longer that same kind of feeling that you had when you first started it. It's because you had evolved as a human being, and you had different needs, and you had another purpose that was still left inside of you that just really wasn't tapped in yet.
Yeah. And maybe also like the purpose in all the work I've done as a teacher in each iteration, the work has been the development of people, the growth of people, right? And so maybe there was just this new iteration that was begging to emerge, right? And I just had to allow it to. But I agree. If you want to know every unhealthy habit of thinking you have, everything inside of you that needs to be healed, everything that feels uncomfortable, just go right ahead and leave a traditional job and become an entrepreneur, or step into a role where you get paid on commission only, but that space is where you really get to experience some of the things that you get to, but you also get to grow in ways that when you have a traditional job, you don't get to grow. It brings things out of you that probably don't need to be there anyhow. So it does lead to some of the most evolved, emotionally stable, healthy people I know also, if you're willing to do the internal work.
Well, and that's the key. You have to be willing to do the internal work. And I actually was laid off from my corporate job right after I announced that I was pregnant about a year and a half ago. So my son was born. He's 14 months tomorrow as we're recording this. And it was interesting because I went through the transition of, okay, who am I without my corporate job title tied to me? And then once I became a mom, like what's my identity now as a mom? So it was very interesting going through these identity shifts and no longer being able to tie myself to a specific corporation anymore. It's like, okay, this is who I am today. And I feel like going through, like, it was tough some days because I didn't really know who I was without that little piece of me. But I think it takes like being really willing to look inwards to yourself and think about your values and what your passions are and things like that, and what you want for your life moving forward, clearly like you did, to be able to help you see the bigger picture and to really get to that next step. And to your point, it's creating those habits. So I know you got into habit finding. So I really want to dive into that because just the topic in itself is very intriguing.
Yeah, it's super cool. So a lot of people talk about external habits, getting up at a certain time or those types of habits. That's not the kind of work that I do. I work on subconscious habits of thinking. So in our brains, we have a ton happening. About 80% of it is happening below the surface in the subconscious mind. And some of the grooves that get created in that part of the brain get really deep because we repeat patterns of thinking. And many times the outcomes we're getting in our life, in our relationships, in our work, in our ability to embrace structure, in our joy in the process, in our feelings of value and worthiness are deeply affected by these habits of thinking that are happening at a subconscious level. And so the tool that I use, the Habit Finder, is basically a snapshot, like Polaroid picture of those habits of thinking, where you can sort of see, here's where I have high risk of falling into certain habits of thinking. And then we can start to look at, how is that impacting my work? How is that impacting the growth of my business? How is that impacting my ability to make a to-do list and then to actually do what's on it, even when I know I should, but I just don't? So all of those things, that's the work I get to do, is really unearthing those patterns and then replacing them with habits of thinking that will serve us better.
And I would imagine that your clients have to be open to getting really vulnerable and honest with themselves and with you. Otherwise, the process potentially isn't as effective if they were just going to pretend like everything is fine. Because like you said, everything habits wise, when we think about it, it's typically external. So we can see those habits that are happening, but the internal ones, the things that we're thinking, only the other person can actually tell you what they're thinking. So how do you work with your clients to be able to create that safe space so they feel comfortable opening up and really telling you about kind of their most innermost thoughts?
Well, first, it's a sacred honor to be able to hold that kind of space for the people I work with, to give them a chance to process through some of the hardest parts of their work and their life experience, particularly for women. We don't really separate the two. We're not, leaving our home at home fully. We're just bringing all of it everywhere. And so I consider it to be the greatest gift when I get to hold space for people who just really, truly, it's not appropriate for them to share a lot of this with just anyone. Because for a lot of my clients, their decisions are impacting hundreds, if not thousands of people. They can't just go talk to anyone about it, right? But every leader, every person like that still needs that safe place. So how do we develop that trust? I think slowly over time. I think little by little it develops. I will tell you, one of the greatest gifts from it also is that a lot of times I'm the one that gets the call of the great news, the promotion, the pay raise, the growth of the business, the best year of sales ever, the win in terms of leading their sales team to their best years ever. It's such a gift to be able to also not just share the pain. Sometimes when you're doing really well, you can't always celebrate that with everyone either. So I consider it to be, like I said, an honor and a privilege that I will never take lightly. I really cherish the trust my clients give me.
How rewarding. And I want to add to that too. Like, obviously, people are listening to this right now, so they can't see you. So, just from an audio standpoint, you're very calming and you're very comfortable to talk with. And even visually here too, it's just like I feel like I just want to be your best friend. So I'm sure that like you have like just such a warm and welcoming smile, and just your eyes are glowing all the time. So I think that that's probably communicated with your clients as well, is that you immediately put them at ease where they feel comfortable sharing the lows, but also the highs with you. Like that you're who they think of, that they want to spill the tea to, whether.
Totally. I think it's also maybe a little bit of just natural gifting. It's something that I just really feel alive when I'm doing it. But there is sort of a spiritual element to it where I feel just it's something that works through me, I guess. And so I'm grateful for that too, to be able to do work where you experience that. is a gift.
Well, and I think that goes back to kind of listening to your inner voice. And part of that, I think a lot of us know what we kind of air quotes should be doing, but sometimes society tells us what it thinks we should be doing. So the fact that you have been able to tap into these natural gifts while still honoring this natural born gift as far as like educating and creating space for people that you've done in every single part of your journey is really beautiful here. But to go back to the habit finding, obviously people, like, you've created a safe space for people, but what kinds of people would you be working with and how do you work with them?
I work with the majority women, though I do have some male clients. I do groups, small groups of women I call it Encounter. We do school semesters, so fall and spring, where there is a habit finder assessment that you can actually take for free at amykemp.com. Anyone can take that. But along with that is a curriculum. And so my clients take the assessment, obviously, but then the groups, we work together through the curriculum and the 6 habits of thinking that are included in the assessment. So I do that twice a year, groups of 8 women, typically from around the country. We meet during lunch hours and share that journey. And then I also work with clients in a one-on-one capacity using the same curriculum, but sort of like rather than being in a small classroom or a small group, it's a much more tailored experience for my one-on-one clients, or maybe they're at a level of leadership where they need privacy, or just what they need to work through is really more, they wouldn't feel comfortable sharing it in a small group. So one-on-one and small groups are the way that I really do my work right now. And then I also just published my very first book. So I wanted to create a way for people to kind of step into the foyer of my work and look around the house and see if they wanted to come in further, that was accessible to everyone. But also the book is designed to feel like a coaching session with me feels. It's called I See You because of that. I want my reader to really feel seen in the pages of the book, not like I'm the expert coming in, but like, this is my house and you can come in and sit down for a bit and feel comfortable, feel seen.
And I love that title. It just speaks to you. Obviously, the people reading it, you may not even know that they're on this planet, but just to be able to pick up your book, to like read the title and to be able to feel like you're stepping into your home, especially when a time might be tough, that sounds like exactly what would be needed.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's funny. The publisher was a little iffy on the title because they didn't want it to sound like I see you, like the hospital. So it's funny, but I really was adamant about it. Can I quick share the story behind the title? Because it's such a great story about how it originated. So I had gone to this community event. It was like a fundraiser, and a mutual friend had introduced me to this woman who I kind of just knew of her, but kind of an across the room person. And so I really liked her, just quick interaction. And so I invited her for a cup of coffee. And so we were having coffee, and I just heard her whole story. I was asking her about her professional journey. And she's someone who like sits at really important tables. She makes important decisions. She's very well known in our community, busy mom. Anyhow, about 55 minutes into the conversation, she brusquely interrupts me and says, "Why did you invite me to coffee?" And I didn't hesitate, and I don't know where it came from, but I just said, "Because I see you." And she put her head down and wept. And it felt like a really long time. And then she kind of sat up and she brushed off her face, and she sat up and she kind of collected herself and she said, "Thank you. So few people do."
Wow.
And so that was the inspiration. There are all of these women that everyone is seeing all the time. I mean, she's so visible, but no one's really seeing. That's who I wrote this book for.
Wow. I'm speechless right now. Like, eyes tearing up, kind of speechless. That's really a beautiful story. And it just reaffirms that you are where you're supposed to be. Like, this is what you're here for. And clearly she needed that day. That's beautiful. Well, with that being said, I know that everyone's on their edge of their seat to work with you at this point, knowing that you really get it. You really see them. So where would they be able to go and find out more? I know you mentioned your assessment.
Yeah.
So Amy Kemp.
I feel like that's the easiest space to start. amykemp.com is my website. So AMYKEMP.com. take the Habit Finder for free. You get the full assessment results right away in your inbox. And it's a great way to start exploring what habits of thinking are, how they're impacting you. You also can follow me on social media at Amy Kemp Inc. on Instagram and Facebook. And then I would invite you to read or listen to ICU. I recorded the Audible also, so it's my voice, but the book, I wrote it for you, and I would be honored to have you read it.
I love that you recorded it yourself too. Even better. Well, Amy, thank you so much for hopping on today. A lot of the women that are listening to this have dreams of starting their own business. So if you could think of one piece of advice for the woman listening to this and who is really inspired by your story, what kind of advice would you give her?
I would say never ever apologize for and always leave space in your budget for investing in growing you, whether that is a coach, a class. Personal development always precedes business growth in my mind, and especially of the owner and founder of a company or business. And I have invested so much time and money in growing me that gave me more of a payback over the long run than any system or business. I mean, all of that's important as well. But what you really need to invest in is yourself, is growing you as a person. The rest will take care of itself. But it's this internal work that needs the biggest investment.
Great advice. And speaking of the internal work, I know that you mentioned earlier that you were working with a lot of coaches, and then you also met with your financial advisor during that time too, and that you weren't going to meet your financial and life goals. So now that 8 years later, you are in a different profession. What is life like for you today?
So it's amazing. I'm working less than I ever have in terms of hours. We just met with our financial advisor, and without giving away personal information, what I will say is that it's drastically different. We're having conversations about where do we invest money, and can we make this kind of investment, and how this has grown and that has grown and this has changed. It's kind of breathtaking, to be honest. It feels a little surreal at times that decision, that moment, that turning point that felt and led to some painful moments along the way has led me to where I am today and getting to do work that I love so much all at the same time. I'm deeply grateful.
Well, we're just so happy for you that you've been able to experience this journey and really become more as a result of it. So, Amy, thank you so much for hopping on today. Your story is just beyond anything I could have hoped for. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Megan.